Hi everybody, welcome to GTCoding. In this video, we will see how to add Google Authentication to your app using NextAuth. So first of all, let me just give you a demo. So here we have this simple home page, and we can click on any of these sign in buttons. I'll just click on this button right here. And here we can see that we are taken to the Google login page, and let's log into our account. So I'll just click on the email ID. And here we can see that we are logged into our Gmail account, and we are getting the name from the Google account and also the email ID over here. And we are also getting the profile image. And when we click on this sign out button, now we can see that we are signed out of our Google account, and here we are on the login screen. And when we log in for the first time with our Google account, we will also store the details into a MongoDB so that we can also add some additional data to the database. So we will do all of that in this video. Let's get started. Alright, so here I have created this folder called Google Auth, and I just opened it with VS Code. Now let's create a new Next app. So let's click on View and let's click on Terminal. And here let's add our command. So you can just type npx create next app at latest. And let's also add a dot over here to create the app in this current directory. So let's press enter. Let's press enter once again. And now you need to answer some of these questions. So for TypeScript, I'll just select no, and yes for ESLint, and Tailwind CSS will select yes, and no for the src directory, and for the app router we need to select yes, and we'll just keep the default import alias. And now we can see that the app is being created. And with that, our app has been created, and we can just open the app by typing npm run dev. And let's just open this link. And here is our next app, and this is the default homepage of our app. Now let's go ahead and create the design of our app. So let's go back and let's go to the app folder, and here we have this file called page.js, and in that we have all this code, and this is the design that is displayed in our homepage over here. So I'll just go ahead and delete all of that. So let's delete everything inside the return. And here for now, I'll just type hello. And now if we go back to our website, here we can see that it says hello. And let's also remove the default styling. So let's go to the global.css file, and I'll just delete everything after this Tailwind code. And now we can see that all the styles are gone, and now we can start with the design of our app. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and set a max width for our design. So if you go back to our project, here we can see we have this file called layout.js, and this is a file which is basically a container for all the app. So here we can see we have the HTML tag, and we also have the body tag over here, and in that we have the children. Now this children is basically all the design in our app. So let's go ahead and create a container division for this children, and let's add a max width for that. So I'll just create a div, and I'll just add this children inside the div, and let's add some styles over here. So I'll just type class name, and we are going to use Tailwind CSS to style this. So let's go ahead and type max w of 3xl, and if you hover over this, we can see the styles over here. So we have set a max width of 768 pixels. Now if you're not able to see this CSS, you can just go ahead and install an extension called Tailwind. So if you just search for Tailwind CSS, here we can see we have this extension. You can just go ahead and install this Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. And now let's go ahead and bring everything to the center. So I'll just tap MX to set the margin left and right, and let's set it to auto. And now if we go back to our website, now we can see that we have this max width, and if we just add a background color, so if I just type BG red 500, here we can see we have this max width, and our content is in the center. Right now let's go ahead and start with the styling of the login page. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a nav bar. So this is the nav bar. Now we need to have this nav bar in all the pages of our app. So let's go ahead and create a component for the nav bar, and we'll just add it inside this layout file so that it is in all the pages of our app. So let's go over here outside our app folder, and let's create a folder called components. And in this components folder, let's create a new file, and I'll just call it navbar.jsx. And for the navbar, let's tap export default function, and I'll just call it navbar. And here let's tap return. And in the return, we need to have a div. So let's create a div over here. And in this div on the left side, we need to have a logo. So here we can see we have this logo. Now for the logo, I'll just create a link. So I'll just tap link over here. And let's import link from next link. And in this link, we need to have an href. And for the href, I'll just set it to /. So this will go to the home page. And here, I'll just type GTCoding. Right now, let's go ahead and add this navbar to our layout file. So let's go to the layout.js file. And here inside the body and inside this div, let's import the navbar over here. So I'll just type navbar. And we'll just import it from components navbar. And now if you go back to our website, here we can see that the navbar is being displayed. We have the logo displayed over here. Right now let's go back to the navbar and let's continue designing it. So here after this logo, we need to have this button for signing in. So let's create a button for that. And in this button, I'll just type sign in. And let's go back, and this is how it looks. Now let's go ahead and style it. So for the container division, let's go ahead and add some class names. So let's set the padding to 4, and we'll set the display to flex, and we'll set justify between so that the items are to the extreme left and right sides. So here we can see we have the logo on the left side and the sign in button on the right side. And we'll also bring everything to the center vertically. So let's tap items center. And let's also add a shadow. So I'll just tap shadow. And we'll just set the shadow to MD, which is medium. And this is how it looks. Right now, let's go ahead and style this logo. So for the logo, let's add some classes. So I'll just tap class name. And let's set the font to bold. And we'll set the text size to large. And we'll set the color of the text to blue 700. And this is our logo. Right now, let's style this button. So for the button, let's add some classes. So I'll just tap class name. And let's set it to background of slate 900. And let's set the text color to white. And let's set a padding left and right of 6, which is a padding of 24 pixels. And let's set the padding top and bottom to 2. And we'll also set rounded corners, and let's set it to medium. And let's go back. And this is how our navbar looks right now. Now the next thing we will do is we'll create this sign in button. Now what we need to do is when we are signed into our account, we need to show a different screen. So this screen right here. And when we have signed out, we need to show this sign in screen. So we're going to create a single component for that. And I'll just name the component user info. So here inside components, I'll just create a new file and let's call it userinfo.jsx. Now in this, we will display the sign in button if the user is not signed in, and we will display the user info if the user is signed in. So let's go ahead and type export default function, and I'll just call it user info. And here let's type return, and here we need to see whether the user is logged in or not. So for that, we need to use an if condition, and we need to use the NextAuth package for that. But for now, we'll just create the sign in button. So I'll just create a component for the sign in button. So here in the components, I'll just create a new file and let's call it signinbutton.jsx. And here let's tap export default function sign in button. And let's tap return, and for now I'll just type div sign in button. And let's go back over here to the user info. Now let's import the sign in button over here. So I'll just tap sign in button. And here we can see it has auto imported over here. Right now, let's go ahead and import this user info component into our main page. So if you go to this app folder, here we have this file called page.js, and I'll just change this to JSX. And here instead of hello, I'll just import the user info component. So here I'll just go ahead and create a div, and here I'll just type user info, and let's import it from components user info. And I'll just delete the import of the image over here. And let's close the tag. Right now, let's add some styles to the container division. So we need to bring everything to the center of the screen. So let's go ahead and add some classes over here. So I'll just type class name, and let's type grid to set the display to grid, and let's type place items center, and let's set the height to screen, which is 100 viewport height. And we also need to add a negative margin to compensate for this nav bar. So I'll just type minus empty, and I have calculated it to be 24. So let's go ahead and see how it looks. And here we can see that our sign in button is in the center of the screen. Right now, let's go ahead and style this sign in button. So let's go back and let's go to the sign in button component. Let's just change this into a button. And in the button, let's type sign in with Google. Now here we also need to add an image. So here we can see we have the Google logo. So let's go ahead and add the image over here. So I'll just type image, and we can import image from next image. Now here in the image we need to add a source. So I'll just type source equals, and here I have pasted this image inside this public folder, and it is called google logo.png, and we're going to use this image. So let's type / google logo.png, and let's set the height of the image to 30, and we'll also set the width to 30. And let's go back, and here we can see we have the image displayed over here. Now for this text we need to have this blue background color. So let's go ahead and add this inside a span. So let's type span, and let's add this text inside the span, and let's add some classes over here. So I'll just type class name, and let's set a background color. So I'll just type BG blue, and let's set it to 500, and let's set the text color to white, and we'll set the padding left and right to 4, and padding top and bottom to 3. And this is how it looks. Right now we need to bring this logo on the left side and this text on the right side. So let's go to the container, which is the button, and let's add some classes. So I'll just type class name, and let's set the display to flex, and items center, and let's set a gap of 4, and we'll also add a shadow of XL, and let's set it to rounded large. This is how it looks. Let's also add some padding left. So here let's tap PL, and let's set it to 3, and now it looks alright. And with that we have completed designing the home page of our app. Now it's time for us to add NextAuth and add Google Authentication. Now for adding Google Auth we need to install a package called NextAuth. So let's go back to the terminal, and I'll just close this server. So you can just press Ctrl+C, and let's type npm I, and we're going to install a package called NextAuth, and we'll also install one more package for storing the data to a MongoDB database. So let's type mongoose. So we're going to use this package to access the data from the MongoDB database. So let's press enter. Right now let's go ahead and start our server back. So let's type npm run dev, and here we have our server running once again. So let's go back, and the first thing we need to do is we need to create a folder inside the app directory, and we need to name it API. And in the API folder we need to create one more folder called Auth, and in the Auth folder we need to create one more folder called square brackets, and in that you need to type ... NextAuth. And then in this folder we need to create a new file called route.js. Make sure that you have created these folders with the same exact names. Right now here we need to write the code for NextAuth. So first of all we need to import NextAuth from NextAuth/next. So let's type import NextAuth from NextAuth/next. Now since we're going to use Google Authentication, let's import Google provider from NextAuth /providers/Google. Right now we need to create an object for the options. So let's type const, and I'll just call it auth options. And in this object we need to have providers. So let's type providers. Now here we're going to add the list of all your providers. We're going to use a Google provider in this. So I'll just type Google provider. And in this we need to add the client ID and the client secret. So let's type client ID. And here we need to add the client ID, and then we need to type client secret. And here we need to add the client secret. And now we need to export this. So let's create a const and let's name it handler. And we need to set it equal to NextAuth. And here we need to provide the options, which is called auth options. So let's tap auth options. And now we need to export it. So let's tap export. Now we need to export it as get and post. So let's tap handler as get and handler as post. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to add the client ID and the client secret over here. Now we'll be adding them inside an environment variable so that the values are safe. So let's go outside the app folder and let's go to the root of our application. And we need to create a new file called .env. And here we can store all the environment variables. And now here let's go to the git ignore file and let's add this env file over here so that it is not pushed to the repository. So let's tap .env and let's close it. Right now we need to get the Google client ID and also the Google client secret. Now here I'm in the documentation of NextAuth, and if you scroll down here we can see that we have the configuration link over here. So you can just go to this link and you can get the Google client ID and the client secret from here. And I will also provide this link in the description of this video. So let's go to the link and you need to log into your Google account for this. And the first thing we need to do is we need to create a new project. So I already have a project over here. So if you don't have a project, you can just create a new project. So I'll just click on new project and you can just name this anything you want. So I'll just name it Google Auth test and let's click on create. Right, the new project has been created. So let's switch to the new project. So I'll just click on this drop down and let's select Google Auth test. Now here we need to go to credentials and go to create credentials and click on OAuth client ID. But here we can see it says that to create the OAuth client ID, we need to first configure our consent screen. So let's click on configure consent screen. And here we have these options. So you need to select external and click on create. And then here we need to add the name of the application. So I'll just call it Auth test. And for the email ID, I'll just add this current email ID. And here also we need to add the email ID. So let's add the email ID over here. And now let's go ahead and click on save and continue. And then here we have these options. You can also add and remove scopes from here. And click on save and continue. And then we have the test users. And I'll just go ahead and go back to the dashboard. And now let's go ahead and click on credentials. And here we need to click on create credentials and OAuth client ID. And here we'll select the application type as web application. And for the name, I'll just type Google Auth test. And let's go ahead and add the authorized JavaScript origins. So for that, you need to go back to the website and we need to copy this link from here and we need to paste it over here. And it should not end with /. So I'll just delete it. And here for the authorized redirect URIs, we need to add the URL of our homepage /API /auth /callback /Google. You need to add this exact URI over here. And here instead of localhost 3000, you can add the link of your website. And now let's go ahead and click on create. And here we can see that our client ID and client secret are displayed over here. So let's click on copy. And let's go back and let's paste the client ID over here. And let's go back and let's copy the client secret from here. And I'll just paste it right here. Now when we use NextAuth, we also need to add some environment variables over here. So we need to type NextAuth URL. And we need to set it to the URL of our website. So let's go back to our website. And let's copy this URL and let's paste it over here. And then we also need to add NextAuth secret. And here you can generate a random text and add it over here. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to wrap the app with the provider of the NextAuth. So for that you need to go back to the app folder and we need to create a new file called providers.js. Now here we need to use something called the session provider from NextAuth and we need to wrap it around the app. So we will wrap it inside the layout.js file. So let's go back to the providers.js file, and here let's type import, and we need to import session provider from NextAuth/React. Now when we use the session provider, we need to change this component into a client component. So let's type use client over here at the top, and here we need to export this session provider. So let's type export, and I'll just call it NextAuth provider. And here we need to get the children, and we need to pass the children inside the session provider. So here we need to type return and session provider, and in the session provider we need to add the children. Now we can go ahead and add this NextAuth provider to our layout.js file, and all the content that we have inside the provider will be passed as children to this, and it will be added over here. So let's go back to the layout.js file, and here we'll just wrap everything inside the NextAuth provider that we just exported over here. So here let's type NextAuth provider, and it is auto imported over here, and I'll just cut this ending tag from here, and let's paste it down here. Right now our whole app is inside this NextAuth provider, and so we'll be able to use the methods inside the NextAuth library. So first of all, let's go ahead and test the sign in. So let's go to this component called signinButton.jsx, and we will add the sign in capability for this. So what we need to do is we need to add an on-click event listener to this button, and when we add event listeners, we need to change this into a client component. So let's type use client over here, and now here let's go ahead and import sign in from NextAuth React, and we're going to use this sign in method over here. So here in the button let's type on click, and here we need to type arrow function sign in, and here we need to pass the name of the provider, which is Google. And now let's see whether this works. So let's go back to our app, and let's click on this login button, and we have this error. So let's go back to our code, and let's see what's the problem. I think we forgot to add the values over here. So here we need to add the Google client ID and the client secret. So it is inside the environment variable. So here we have Google client ID. So let's copy this, and here we need to type process.env. the name, and then we have a Google client secret. So let's copy this, and let's type process.env. the name, and let's go ahead and restart our server. So let's type npm run dev, and let's go back to our application, and let's see whether it works. So let's click on the sign in button, and here we can see that we have the Google login screen displayed over here. Let's click on our email ID, and here we can see that we are logged into our account, and let's see whether we are actually logged in. So for that, let's change the sign in button to sign out when we are logged in. So let's go to the navbar component where we have the sign in button at the top. Now what we're going to do is we're going to display the sign in button when we are not logged in. So for that we need to check whether the user is logged in. So for that, let's go ahead and import something from NextAuth. So I'll just type import, and we need to import use session from NextAuth React. Now for using use session, we need to change this into a client component. So here let's type use client, and here let's type const, and let's get the status from use session. So let's type equals use session. Right now let's add this button inside a conditional. So here let's add curly braces, and let's type status equals authenticated. So if the status is authenticated, then we'll just display this button. So I'll just cut this from here, and let's paste it over here. And if it is not the case, so let's type colon, and here let's go ahead and copy this same button from here, and let's paste it down here, and here let's change this to sign out and this one to sign in. So now what will happen is that when we are signed in, then the button will display sign out, and when we have not signed in, then it will display sign in. So let's go back to our app, And now we can see it says sign out. Now let's also go ahead and add the functionality of sign out and sign in over here. So we need to import them from NextAuth React. So here let's tap sign in and sign out. So here for the button, let's create an on click, and here let's tap arrow function and let's tap sign out. And for the sign in button, let's type on click, arrow function, sign in, and here we need to type Google. And now let's go back and let's test whether this works. So let's click on the sign out button, and now we can see that we are signed out of our account, and here it displays sign in. So now let's click on the sign in button, and now we can see that we are signed into our account. Alright, now the next thing we need to do is we need to display the user info over here when we are signed in, and when we are signed out we need to display this login button. So for that, let's go back to our component, which is user info, and here right now we are just displaying the sign in button. So here first of all we need to import use session from NextAuth React, and since we are using use session, we need to change this into a client component. So let's tap use client over here. Now here we need to get the status and also the data that we get from the session. So let's go ahead and type const and status, and we'll get the data, and I'll just rename it to session, and we're gonna get it from use session. And now here let's add an if condition, and let's type status equals, and let's see whether it is authenticated. And if the status is authenticated, then for now I'll just display a div, and let's type user info, and here let's add an else, and if it is not the case, then we need to return the sign in button. And here also we need to type return, and we need to add this div inside the return. Now let's go back and let's see whether it works. So let's click on this sign in button, and now we can see it says user info, and if I sign out, we have the sign in button displayed over here. Alright, now let's get the actual user data. So here let's go ahead and first of all get the image. So I'll just import image from next image. And here in this image we need to add a source and also a width and a height. So let's set the width and the height to 60. And for the source, we will get the source from this session. So let's tap session, and here if we have the session, then in that we will have user, and if we have the user, then in that we will have image. And now if you go back, now here we have this error because we are getting the image from an external website. So we need to add this to our next config. So let's copy this link from here, and let's go back to our code, and let's go to the next.config.js file, and here inside next config we need to type images, and in that we need to type domains, and here we need to add the link. So let's add the link over here, and now if you go back, let's refresh this page, and now we can see that the image is being displayed over here. Let's go ahead and also display the other data. So here after the image, let's go ahead and create a div, and let's type name, and here let's add the name inside a span. So here let's type curly braces, and if we have a session, then in that we will have the user, and if we have the user, in that we will have the name. And now we can see that the name is being displayed over here, and in the same way let's also get the email ID. So let's type div, let's type email, and here we'll create a span, and here let's type session user email, and here we have the email ID displayed. Right now let's go ahead and style this. So here for the image, let's add some classes. So just type class name, and let's type rounded full, and now we can see we have this round shape. And here for the name, in the span let's type class name, and let's set the font to bold, and we'll do the same for the email. So here let's type class name, font bold. Right now let's add some styles to the container division. So here we have this div, and here let's add some classes. So I'll just type shadow, and let's set it to Excel, and let's add a padding of 8, and let's set it to rounded medium, and let's set display to flex, flex direction to column, And let's add a gap of 3 between the elements. And we'll also change the background color to yellow 200. And that's basically it with our user info. So let's go ahead and click on sign out. And here we have the sign in button. And if I click on sign in, we get these details from our Google account. Right now it's time for us to add the data to a MongoDB database. Now you can just search for MongoDB Atlas and you can create a free account. So I'll just go over here to MongoDB Atlas. And you can just sign up and create a new account. I'll just sign in with my Google account. Right here I have created a new MongoDB Atlas account, and let's select this free version over here. And let's keep all of these as it is, and let's click on create. And here we can see we have this username and password. So I'll just change this to GTCoding. And here we have this password. So I'll just copy this and save it somewhere. So let's go back to our VS Code. And I'll just paste the password over here. We will need it later. And let's create this user. And now here we need to add the IP address. So I'll just type 0.0.0.0/0. So this will be accessible from anywhere. So I'll just click on add entry. And let's click on finish and close. Alright, so here we have our database, and let's go ahead and click on connect. And let's click on MongoDB for VS Code. And let's copy this connection string from here. So let's click on copy. And let's go back and let's paste it over here in the environment variables. So I'll just type MongoDB URI. And let's set it equal to the connection string. And here instead of this password, we need to add the actual password. So let's copy this from here. And let's paste it over here. And here at the end, we also need to add the database name. So I'll just call it Google Auth test. Right now, the next thing we need to do is we need to connect to the database. So here, let's go outside the app folder. And let's create a new folder called lib. And in that, we'll create a new file called mongodb.js. And here we will write the code to connect to our MongoDB database. So we will connect it using Mongoose. So I'll just tap import Mongoose from Mongoose. And let's tap export const, and I'll just call it connect MongoDB. And it is going to be an async function. And here we will add a try catch block. And here in the try, let's type await mongoose.connect. And here we need to add the connection string. So we can just type process.env, and here we have saved it as MongoDB URI. So let's copy this and let's paste it over here. And then let's also add a console.log, and here we'll just type connected to MongoDB. And here in the catch, let's go ahead and console.log error connecting to database, and let's also log the error. Alright, so this is basically the code to connect to the MongoDB database. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to create a schema. Now a schema is basically the structure of our collection. Here in our application, we'll just store the email ID and the name to our database. So in our schema, we will have the email ID, and we'll set the type to string, and also the name, and we'll set it to string as well. So let's go ahead and create the schema. So let's go back to the root of our application, and let's create a new folder, and I'll just call it models. And let's create a new file called user.js. And here, first of all, let's import Mongoose from Mongoose. Right now, let's go ahead and type const, and we'll just name it user schema. And we need to set it equal to new schema, and we'll just import it from Mongoose. And here in this, we need to add all our fields. So the first one is email. So let's type email. And in this email, let's type type, and let's set it to string. And we'll also set it to required of true. Right now, let's add another field, which is name. And here, let's set the type to string and also required to true. And then we'll also store the date. So we can just add it over here by just typing timestamps and set it to true, and it will automatically store the date and the time. Right now here we need to type const, and I'll just call it user equals, and we need to type mongoose dot model, and let's type user, and here we need to add this user schema, so let's type user schema. Now if you already have the model, then we'll just type models, and I'll just import it from mongoose dot, and we will have a model called user, and here we'll just add an or. Now here if you already have a model, then it will just store the model over here, and if you don't have the model, then it will just create this user model with this schema. And now let's go ahead and export this. So I'll just type export default user. Right now let's write the code to store the data to our database. So for that, let's go inside the app folder, and in that we'll go to the API folder, and here we will create a new folder, and we'll just call it user, and in that we'll create a new file called route.js, and here we can write the code to add the data to our database. Now if you want to learn more about the CRUD operations in MongoDB, I already have a video on that. You can go ahead and check that out. I will leave the link in the description of this video. Right now here let's type export async, and let's type function, and it is going to be a post method, so let's type post, and here we'll just get the request. I'll just call it request. Now here the first thing we need to do is we need to get the name and the email from the request. So just type const, and I'll just destructure it over here. So I'll just type name and email, and we'll get it from request.json. And we also need to add await over here because this is gonna return us a promise. And the next thing we need to do is we need to connect to the database. So let's type await connect MongoDB, and I will just import it from lib MongoDB. Right now the next thing we need to do is we need to add the data to our database. So for that, let's type await, and we need to import the user model from models user, and we need to type dot create, and here we need to add the data. So the data that we have are name and email, so let's type name, email, and then lastly let's go ahead and return a next response, and we'll just import it from next server.json, and here let's type message, and let's set it to user registered, and let's also add a status code, and let's set the status to 201. Right now the last thing we need to do is we need to perform a fetch call to this API. So it is inside API, and this user folder should be inside the API folder, so let's move that. Right, so here we can see we have app, in that we have the API folder, and in that we have user, and in that we have this route.js file. And now let's go ahead and see whether the fetch call works alright. So for that we will just use Postman to test this API endpoint. Right, so this is an application called Postman, and you can use this application to test your API endpoints, and you can just download it for free from Google. So let's go ahead and create a new request, and let's type http localhost, and I think it is 3000. So it is 3000, and in this we have this folder called API, and in that we have user. So let's type /API/user, and we need to change the method to post, and let's go over here to body, and let's select raw, and let's change this to JSON, and here we need to add the name and the email. So let's type name, and let's add a test name over here, and then let's type email, and let's type test@gmail.com, and let's click on send, and let's see whether everything is working alright. So let's click on send, and here we can see we have this response user registered. So let's go to our MongoDB database, and let's click on browse collections, and here we can see we have Google Auth test, and in that we have users, and we have the test user displayed over here. So the API is working alright. Now let's go ahead and store the data of the user when the user signs in for the first time. So I'll just close this Postman application, and let's go to this NextAuth route.js file. Now here in NextAuth, we can also use callbacks. So let's tap callbacks. And we have different callbacks in NextAuth, and one of them is called sign in. So let's tap async sign in. And here we get some data. So I'll just destructure the user and the account. And for now, I'll just go ahead and console.log the data. So let's go ahead and type console.log user, and console.log account and account. And for the sign in to work correctly, we also need to return the user. So just type return user. Right now, let's open the terminal and let's see whether we get these values. Let's go back to our website and let's click on sign in. Now we can see we have signed into our account, and let's go back to the terminal. And here we can see we have all the data displayed. So in user, we have the user ID, we have the name and also the email ID and also the image. And in account, we have the provider, which is Google, and some other things over here. So let's go ahead and write the code to store the data to our database. So the first thing we need to do is we need to check whether the account provider is Google. So here let's type if account dot provider equals Google, and if it is true, then we need to add the data. So let's create a try catch block, and here in the try, let's go ahead and perform a fetch call. So let's type await fetch, and here we need to add HTTP localhost 3000 API user, and then we need to add an object with the options. So here we need to type method, and we need to set it to post, and then we need to type headers, and for the headers let's type content type, and let's set it to application JSON, and then lastly we need to send the body. So I'll just type body, and we need to send it as JSON. So let's type JSON dot stringify, and here we need to send the name and the email. So I'll just destructure it over here. So here let's type const, and we'll destructure it from user because we are getting it from user, and that we have name and email. So let's type name email from user, and here we'll just pass the name and the email. So let's type name email, and let's go ahead and store this result inside a const named res, and let's go ahead and check whether it is okay. So let's type if, let's type res.ok, then we'll just return the user. So when we return the user, it will actually sign in. And here in the catch, let's go ahead and type console.log error. Right now, let's go ahead and see whether this works. So let's go back to the MongoDB database, and right now we just have this data that we tested. So let's go ahead and sign out, and let's click on sign in. Let's go back to our MongoDB database, and let's refresh this page. And now if you scroll down here, we can see that we have the data from our Google account. So we have the email ID and the name displayed over here. And right now, if you just sign out and sign in once again, and if you go over here and if you refresh this page, we can see that the data is stored once again. So we need to make sure that the data is not already available in the database before storing it in the database. So for now, I'll just go ahead and delete all this data. Right, so I have deleted all the data, and now let's go back to the code. And here, let's check whether the data is already available. So for that, here, I'll just type await, and let's connect to the database. So I'll just type connect MongoDB, and we'll just import it from lib MongoDB. And then we need to type await user, and we need to import user from models user. So here we have it, and dot find one, and here we need to pass the value that we need to find. So the unique value is email, so I'll just type email over here, and I'll just store it inside a variable called user exists. And we'll just add all of this inside an if block. So here let's type if the user does not exist. So let's type exclamation user exists. And let's copy all this code from here. And let's paste it inside this if condition. So this is how the code looks. First of all, we are just checking whether the provider is Google. And if the provider is Google, then we are proceeding to destructure the name and the email from the user. And then we are using this try catch block, and in that we are first of all connecting to the database, and then we are checking whether the user already exists with this email value. And if the user does not exist, then we'll just perform a fetch call to this API user with the method of post and with this data which we are getting from the user. And then if everything goes all right, we'll just return the user. So now let's go ahead and save this, and let's see whether it works. So let's go back to our website, and first of all let's refresh this MongoDB database. And right now we don't have any data over here, so let's go back over here, sign out, and let's click on sign in. And here we can see we have signed into our account. So let's go back to the MongoDB database and let's refresh this page. And now here we can see that the data is being stored in the database. We also have the timestamps. And now let's sign out and let's sign in once again. And let's see whether the data is stored again. So let's click on sign in. And here we can see we have signed in. So let's go back to our database and let's refresh this page. And here we can see that the data is not stored once again. So whenever the user signs in for the first time, the data is added in the database. Right, so that's basically how you can use Google Authentication using NextAuth and also store the data in MongoDB. Alright, so that's basically it for this video. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below, and I will leave the link of the source code in the description of this video. So if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.